Welcome back to the Vandy Sports Podcast and the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Billy Derrick, alongside Joey Dwyer. We're here to recap Vanderbilt's 24-17 loss to LSU down in Baton Rouge. The Commodores fall to 6-5 overall, 3-4 in the SEC. And Joey, this team, as you wrote in your column and a little bit in your offensive report card, this team's going to have to look in the mirror. They've lost 3 of their last 4. It's not awful. You lost another one-score game. I feel like that's happened a lot this year. But there was a play late in the game where LSU threw it out to number 1, Aaron Anderson, I think is his name, and he juked Langston Patterson out of his shoes, juked C.J. Taylor out of his shoes, got the first down, and just about iced the game. I mean, there were a lot of plays to kind of ice the game tonight. That was one of them. That was a microcosm, Joey, that the tackling was another huge, huge issue tonight. But I think for the first time all season, the pass rush, the lack thereof, was really glaring. I mean, you go back to the Texas game, we talked a little bit about that, but they had a few big sacks on Quinn Ewers in that game. So I'm not quite sure how to describe what's happened with this defense, and maybe the easy thing to say is that they've run out of gas. And that's understandable late in the season. But, Joey, this team is going to have to rewrite their script a little bit heading into to Tennessee, a huge game, obviously. But tonight it wasn't Vanderbilt football. And the SEC Network guys after the game said LSU out Vanderbilt football. And they did. They possessed the football. They converted on third downs. They stopped the run. And that's why we're talking about LSU beating Vandy tonight.
Yeah, Billy, just first of all, I think this team has kind of come back to earth in a sense. You thought early in the year they kind of had some magic. They had a scheme that nobody really knew how to defend. They had the quarterback that nobody could figure out how to stop or limit or make less confident than their quarterback. And right now Vanderbilt looks uniquely human in a way I don't think it's looked for a lot of the season. They beat Alabama. They beat Virginia Tech. Those were magical wins. But now I think you're starting to see they're getting pushed around a little bit. The tackling, I think, was a big problem tonight. Diego Pavia got hit 8 times. He doesn't look super healthy. I don't think Langston Patterson looks incredibly healthy. Still got the ankle really taped up. I think this season is really worn on them, and you're starting to see that come through. I think the last 2 games have been their 2 most decisive losses to this point. And tonight, obviously a one-score game, but LSU could have punched it in pretty easily there at the end. And Vanderbilt obviously had that long drive to make it a one-score game late and gave themselves a chance. But again, one of their more decisive losses of the year, and that's not saying a ton because I don't think they've had a whole lot of decisive losses. Even when they have lost, it's been close. But Billy, this is a different feel than I think I've had after a loss outside of maybe the South Carolina one. I think teams know what they're going to run now. There's a blueprint out on this team, and I think the days of Vanderbilt, at least this season, being able to completely out-scheme the physical mismatches that are on the field are kind of over. I think it's now Vanderbilt's guys against the other team's guys. And I thought tonight LSU had the more physically imposing guys and dominated in a lot of facets of the game as a result. They threw for 332 yards, something along those lines. I think it had 9 passes over 15 yards, a lot of explosive plays, some explosive runs, and Vanderbilt just didn't seem to have a lot of answers for what LSU was doing tonight. It felt more like previous year's Vanderbilt teams than this year's team, and I think that's kind of a result of the bubble being bursted on this team and it kind of hitting its level because teams kind of know what it's going to do now. And that's not to say it's not a good team. I think maybe that's gotten lost in my messaging here. I think they're still a good team. LSU has lost 3 in a row, but I don't think LSU is a bad team either. You go into Baton Rouge and only lose by 7. That's something. But also, man, I think they're going to have to really adjust here. And we're going to see kind of how they want to evolve over the next couple of weeks. Tennessee, I think you're going to be hard-pressed to completely change things up. But as they head to the bowl, I wonder if you get a little bit of a different look and maybe some different personnel in there. Nate Johnson was in there tonight a bit, which I thought was maybe somewhat of their answer. But with Diego Pavia banged up, teams knowing their scheme, and the defense really seeming to wear down a little bit, I think this team's searching for some answers at this point. And that's not to say this is a terrible season or anything along those lines, but just kind of where they are. They're searching for answers, and they're in a brunt of a really brutal stretch.
Yeah, LSU is a good team, not a great team. I think they've shown flashes of being a great team, but I'm glad you mentioned they came into this game losing 3 straight. LSU, it was going to be really, really tough to beat LSU tonight. I think we knew that. I had a lot of people I talked to, and I knew that picked Vandy to win tonight. I don't think that was bad on their part. I mean, it was one of those games where I at least didn't have a great feel on it, but when I saw Vanderbilt come out and score a touchdown, take an early 7-0, or tie it up at 7, I would guess at that point. Or did they take an early 7-0 lead?
They had a 7-0 lead.
Okay, yeah, early 7-0 lead. Then LSU responds with how quickly and really dominantly LSU responded there. I got the feeling that LSU was not going to be denied tonight. I'm not saying, at that point I said they were going to win in a landslide, but they're at home, they're at night. That's where they're comfortable. They're desperate, and they weren't as maybe well rested as Vanderbilt, but they've got better depth than Vanderbilt. They've got better athletes than Vanderbilt. I thought their offensive line played spectacular. I mean, that LSU offensive line is one of the better units in the conference. They showed why. LSU played to their strengths. They played to their strengths. Nussmeier was phenomenal. He proved why he's an NFL quarterback. And just, his dad's and the quarterback coach with the Eagles. He's got a great pedigree, and he just diced up Vanderbilt tonight. And, there was really not much. Like, I know on Twitter, a lot of people are talking about Vanderbilt should have sent more pressures. I just think LSU, it was their type of night to where Nussmeier was, he didn't have any pressure. He was comfortable. When they did send pressures, they threw it real quick to the outside, and it's like Vanderbilt didn't even send a pressure. So credit to Joe Sloan, LSU's OC, and Nussmeier, and Brian Kelly as well, because obviously he's been more involved with the offense. It's a good LSU team, and they were playing in their element. With the start, Joey, for Vanderbilt to go up 7-0, you thought, okay, out of the bye week, here comes Vanderbilt rocking and rolling. But again, with the way LSU drove down the field, that next possession to quickly tie it back up, that's when I thought to myself, okay, this is going to be really tough for Vanderbilt. They couldn't run the football really at all. Pavia had a flash or two there, but that's all it was. There was nothing consistent tonight. Alexander, 9 carries for just 24 yards. And Newberry, 22 yards. Nate Johnson, I thought they need, that's something I want to get into, Joe, because, Nate had 3 carries for 20 yards tonight. I think just 3 snaps. I don't think he attempted a pass tonight, but I wonder why we're just now seeing a little bit more of that. Like, we had talked about that, and as something, especially with Pavia being banged up here down the stretch the last really month of the season, and maybe even longer. I'd like to see a little bit more of that. And, we started to see more of that tonight, and there was a point in 2 snaps he had 18 yards. So, and again, there's only so much you can do at that point, Joe, with a guy that you put in like Nate Johnson, who's a designed QB runner. But I think he can give you something. And again, I don't think tonight, I'm not saying they should have done it more tonight, but I just wonder why we didn't see more of that before tonight. But at the end of the day, they also lost in the trenches. Defensive line was not effective. Probably the worst, pass rush type game. We saw they just did not get home at all. And again, give credit to LSU's offensive line, but it just they just didn't play their game. They did not play to their identity. And I didn't think they played awful. They hung in there, but even at the end, for somebody turning on the TV late and watching that was not, it didn't feel like a 1-possession game. And, LSU did control the game. You got into the third quarter, and Vanderbilt never closed that gap in the game. And again, I thought they were out-athleted, but it's very indicative right now to me, Joey, very clear that offensive coordinators and quarterbacks on the opposing team know the weaknesses on Vanderbilt's defense. And obviously that's, you're late in the season, you got a lot of film on a defense. They're spreading it out. Vanderbilt up the middle is a good defense. You haven't seen a ton of teams just dominate Vanderbilt up the middle in the run game. They're getting it out in space. They're spreading it out. They're using tempo, and they're using the run game to continue to establish things. But they just didn't play their brand, Joey. And I look at the tackling issues and the lack of a pass rush is probably the two biggest issues. I know offense is a big issue, but defensively, I don't know. I thought the defense could have played better. Obviously, the offense could have played better, but the offense has been the offense for, the last month and a half or so, really ever since the Alabama game. The defense has played better tonight. I thought they could have played better tonight, but at the end of the day, LSU takes it home, and now Vanderbilt awaits Tennessee.
I think the SEC Network crew put it really well after the game and said LSU out Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
And I think a lot goes into that, right? You look at the defense and then failing to get off the field as a result of tackling issues. You look at the lack of a pass rush. I thought Garrett Nussmeier had all day to really just pick Vanderbilt apart, and he's way too good to give that much time to. And I think there's not a group of corners in the SEC that's good enough to be able to hang out there that long and not get torn up by a group of receivers and a quarterback like that. But Vanderbilt specifically is not good enough to do that. They've got some talent in the defensive backfield, but you've also got Jalen Lackey, a freshman, starting. You got Colby Taylor, who struggled in coverage. Tyson Russell struggled in coverage, and even Martel Height is not a SEC number one corner on a lot of the teams in the league. I think he's a good corner and could be on a couple other teams, but they're limited there. And I thought when their front seven is limited, that group's really going to be limited. And they just don't play complementary football like they did a couple weeks ago. You saw the Kentucky game. They played really solid complementary football, even though the offense really didn't score a ton. But it's just like, man, the offense isn't doing enough, and the defense still has their shortcomings as well. It's not like Auburn where the defense is picking up the offense, or Alabama where the offense is picking up the defense. They're both just kind of ho-hum. Neither are stepping up in huge ways. The special teams did make a difference tonight, I thought. And I think the big story, too, Diego Pavia, man, he is just, I think, a little bit more banged up than maybe a lot of people thought going into the week. You saw even on that big run he had, kind of pulled up and went out of bounds. And I don't think that's a characteristic play of Diego Pavia. I think that's a guy who's going to hunt contact and try to get a couple extra yards. That's much to the chagrin of Clark Lee at times, but I think that's just who he is. And seeing him go out of bounds there, I saw, man, he might be a little banged up, right? And I think that was part of the reason for Nate Johnson coming in. And something worth noting in that conversation as well, I think maybe you could see more of him just as a result of Pavia being banged up. I do want to push back on the notion a little bit of like he should be out there more, because I think Pavia is your guy and you got to keep him on the field. He's the best playmaker on the team. Not necessarily that you were pushing to play him more, but I think there is some sentiment of that within the fan base. And I think Pavia is your guy, even when he's hurt, and he's got to be on the field, right? He's got to be able to control the offense. You've seen for a lot of the year, Nate Johnson's been out there and hasn't done a whole lot. I think he's capable of it, but I think it's just so predictable at times, and Pavia gives him an element that he doesn't. But right now he's banged up, man, and I think Cedric Alexander is too, and his lack of production in the last couple of weeks has been a big thing. I think the offensive line has kind of resorted to the level of play that maybe we had expected from them in the preseason rather than what we saw against Virginia Tech and Alabama and maybe Kentucky. They're a group that I think is a really good offensive line when this system is playing and teams aren't able to figure out the system. But when it's just body on body and man on man, they're probably not going to win a ton of battles. I think you're starting to see that a little bit. The cut blocks are great and the zone blocking schemes and the double teams work. But when you got to play man on man, body on body, I think you really see the true colors. And tonight, I think you saw that in a lot of senses, not only on the offensive line, but on the defensive line, on the perimeter. LSU really forced Vanderbilt to play him straight up. And I think that was a huge piece of this game and a big reason why LSU won tonight.
Yeah, early in the season, whether it was Virginia Tech, Alabama, even Kentucky a little bit, Vanderbilt was new. They could out scheme people, and they were consistently out scheming teams. But for me, Joey, it was honestly maybe even that Ball State game where I looked at that and went, okay, we're seeing the talent they've got, and that Ball State game was like, okay, they've got better talent than Ball State, but it didn't look like it was overwhelming talent, right? It didn't, I think at that point we realized that, okay, this team kind of, they are who they are. They're at 6 wins. They're still a good team. This is a good football team, but can they get to that next step this season? And again, maybe maybe they win 2 more games and finish with 8 on the season, and that would be an 8-5 finish, which would be awesome. That's the next step.
Mm-hmm.
But where they're at right now, I think there's some people sitting here saying, okay, they likely finish 6-6 and and have a chance to win a bowl game, get to 7-6. But I mean, I think every game matters here, so I think that's big. But again, I think the scheme point you make is great. They're not out scheming anybody anymore. And that's been the case really the last month and a half. I look at the receiving numbers. Good day for Skinner. Obviously, he had the long 63-yard catch and didn't do a whole lot else after that. He did have 7 targets. Loic Fouonji, big night for him. And again, I don't know if that's a one-off, but I mean, we've seen a little bit of that from him, Joey, but really not a whole lot, nothing consistent. Maybe that's something we see more of next week. Fouonji on some of those third downs. Sherrill, only 3 targets. I thought that, I think you probably need to get Sherrill more than just 3 targets. Eli Stowers, just 4 targets, 2 catches. He's hurt. I mean, he's got the brace on, and he's obviously not 100%. He could go out there and play, but I think we're seeing when you've got Pavia banged up, Stowers banged up, Alexander's probably not 100%. This offense looks a lot different. So
Also Stowers' scheme, right? They tried to run that little pitch to him.
Yeah.
It had worked flawlessly for the first couple weeks. LSU ate that up tonight, and I think that was kind of a microcosm of the scheme, and Eli Stowers as a whole was too.
And it's something I want to mention too, Joey, just watching the game. The edges, these teams' defensive ends are crashing. They're not sitting, Virginia Tech, Alabama, Kentucky, they were doing a lot of they'd converge and then kind of sit back and wait, and then they'd get slow feet, and then boom, Alexander would have it or Pavi would take. These ends are crashing and they're blowing up these plays. So, on these play fakes, that Vanderbilt has no time on those play fakes. It's almost like I thought to myself at one point tonight, they'd be better off going off an empty 5 wide, just throwing out quick passes, because, any time there was a play fake, they just had no time. And LSU's got a pretty good defensive line, but, I don't think it's as good as Texas's, Tennessee's, South Carolina's, so I think that's just a theme of teams watching film where their ends are crashing, and they're not going to let Pavia beat you. They're going to bracket Stowers, and at that point, what do you do if you're Vanderbilt's offense? So it's they're predictable, but it's also, to me, it's hard to blame one person here. I think it's just kind of the fact of the matter. This team doesn't have a high variance. We talk about Vanderbilt basketball this season. You never know what you're going to get from, you got 24 from Nickel the other night. He could have 2, coming up tomorrow. But the Vanderbilt football team, if they're winning, Pavia is rushing for 80 to 100 yards on the ground. I think they've won with less than that, but he's also making big plays. Like, Pavia is playing well, Stowers is playing well, and your defense is playing Clark-Lee defense. There's not a whole lot else you can get. LSU's got 4 or 5 targets they can go to. If Lacey and Taylor have off nights, you've still got Anderson and Daniels and Durham out of the backfield. Those backs played really well tonight. Vanderbilt just doesn't. They don't have that depth. I think that can be developed within the program, but that showed tonight, Joey, that they don't have that depth of variance with what they have to offer.
I think that comes in huge on the perimeter too. Like, they need more weapons on the perimeter. I think that's got to be something they look to in the offseason. Another thing they got to look to in the offseason, and we're not there yet, but I think it's pretty clear they need another edge rusher too, and a pretty good one at that. I think they really need to get home more, and they need a game wrecker because they don't have that right now. I think they have a couple game wreckers on the back end, Brandon Fontenette. C.J. Taylor, I thought, made some plays tonight, but they need more of those type of guys. They got Stowers, they got Pavia, they got Fontenette. Next year, to get to the next level, I think you're going to have more guys who you don't have to scheme open, or you don't have to scheme into making a play. You got to have more playmakers, and they've got a few now, but I think to take that next step, they've got to recruit more guys who are real, tangible difference makers, and I think that's a big part of the next step in this program. LSU's got guys like that, and that's why they were able to win this game, right? They went body on body, and their guys won out against Vanderbilt. And I think Vanderbilt is still searching for a few more playmakers. I think they're a few playmakers away. And I think you saw that tonight a little bit. Loic Fouonji, I thought, stepped up, but man, I don't think you can necessarily rely on him to do that. And how many of those receivers can you really rely on to do that? Even Quincy Skinner had 72 yards, but 63 of those came on the first play of the game, and he's supposed to be your number one guy. Yeah. Sherrill, I thought, had a performance that you can't really critique a whole lot, 3 receptions for 40 yards. But, man, I think they're still a few guys away from being able to win a game like this when they don't have their best. And you saw that tonight, and they're a little bit away in a lot of different ways. And that all kind of came to light tonight. Not to say that it's going to be that way every game, but to go into Baton Rouge and win at night, you've got to be nearly flawless, and you've got to just have your playmakers make plays. And I think they fell a little bit short of that tonight. And maybe some of that's health. Maybe they win a few weeks back if they were a little bit healthier and Warren is worn down. But Billy, tonight they looked uniquely human in a way that they had not throughout a lot of the season.
Yeah, we like to call Pavia the magic man, and this team had that magic feel to them. Well, that feel's gone now, and they have not hit rock bottom. Again, this team is still bowl eligible. They're at 6 wins. They've got a chance to get a 7th next week against Tennessee. But where's the mood at right now? I mean, I want to get a feel of where do you think this team is at ahead of Tennessee, Joey? What are your early thoughts on that matchup? Does this dampen how you feel about that matchup, or are you still sitting here saying, Vandy's got a legit shot. They're at home. It's an early kick. It might be cold. What do you think?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think they got a shot, and I think they're certainly going to be ready to play. They were ready to play today, and I think that's something we got to mention too. Like the first drive of the game today forced LSU to go 3 and out. They get the 63-yard touchdown pass to Skinner, and then Bryce Cowan goes and lights up the guy on special teams. Then it all went downhill from there. They're going to be ready to play for Tennessee, and they're going to be at home, and I wonder if it's more of a home field advantage than normal, but certainly not going in there with the momentum they had. And if I had to make a prediction, I flip-flopped on it a bunch, so I'm not going to. But I think I'd like Tennessee more than I would have a couple weeks ago. And it's going to be interesting to see how this team responds because you saw the edge they had, the confidence they had throughout a lot of the early part of the year. It's almost felt like that's dimmed a little bit. And maybe we haven't talked to the right guys recently, and that's why. But I don't know. I just wonder how much is still in there, how much is in the tank for this team in a game like that. And it very well could be a lot because I don't think I'm ever going to count this team out after what I saw them do early in the year. But also, they've got a lot of questions to answer, and I'm not sure that team, with their back against the wall searching for a playoff berth, is necessarily the team they're going to figure it out against. They could play spoiler. I think they are wired that way to where you could look at it and say, man, nobody thought they were going to win, and they go and win. So I'm not going to count them out yet. I think that's certainly a possibility, but Tennessee's got a lot to play for and more than Vandy has to play for right now. And that's something that I'm monitoring as well. And I think is big heading into next week. So I would say they have a chance, but I think they're going to be double-digit underdogs. And they're certainly going to have to turn in a better showing than they have in any game since maybe the Texas game.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't seen that same Vanderbilt team that beat Alabama really since Alabama. I mean, we're in Lexington, we weren't necessarily celebrating a flawless Vanderbilt performance that night. That was a tough, grinded out win for Vanderbilt, and they got the win. And then you go on the road to beat Auburn, but even Auburn that was ugly. So they've had to win ugly when they've won. Even Ball State, can they put it all together one final time in the regular season? Get back to playing well. You're playing a young quarterback who we don't know how he plays in the cold. I guess it was colder-ish in Knoxville today, but it'll be interesting to see what they can have teed up for Nico. And Nussmeier he's a veteran. He's gonna be in the NFL. Sellers still a young guy, really physical. I'll be interested to see how they approach Nico in that matchup. But yeah, I would probably say 12.5, 13 would probably be the number there on the line. I'll be interested to see what the movement is. But either way, Vanderbilt loses to LSU 24-17. Again, the score is not indicative of how that game went and how that game felt to watch it. Big night for Nussmeier and the LSU offense. Vanderbilt will regroup and await Saturday's matchup with Tennessee, 11 a.m. kickoff. It'll be on ABC. We'll have the coverage for you, so we'll be up bright and early. Joey, bring your coffee, and we'll be ready to roll.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And Billy, not a coffee guy, but I know you'll be ready to go. I see it every week, and
Oh yeah,
looking forward to next weekend. That's a big one. My first Vandy, Tennessee at First Bank Stadium, so should be interesting. But for now, Vanderbilt's got some questions to answer heading into that matchup.
no doubt. It'll be interesting. Vanderbilt and Tennessee next week. Thanks again for checking out another episode of the Vandy Sports Podcast. That's Joey Dwyer. I'm Billy Derrick saying so long.